Hey there, and welcome to the Confident Woman Podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Brooks. Join me as I sit down and chat with co-hosts, friends, and carefully curated guests and talk about all the things that empower you to become your best and most confident self. So, let's get started. Welcome back. So today we have with us Sarah Boes, and Sarah is a passionate advocate for mental health and female entrepreneurship. Her own experiences with anxiety and OCD have fueled her mission to help others manage mental health challenges, particularly with high-stakes environments like healthcare. She leverages her platform to support female entrepreneurs and promote awareness about the importance of mental well-being in the professional setting. So, of course, we're going to unpack a lot because this is such an important topic that I think that so many of us silently and secretly battle, but we really need to raise the volume on that. So before we dive in, I'm just going to pass the mic to Sarah and let her share a little bit more about herself and her journeys that led into the works that she does.
Thank you. I think first of all, it is really nice to be called Sarah Boes. And I know that sounds silly, but everything in the business that I created and sold is tied to Sarah Michelle. And so I'm so used to being called Sarah Michelle all the time. And I'm entering into this new season in my life where I'm leaving that business behind for the first time. We were acquired a couple of years ago, but I've been working there ever since. But now I'm really taking a big leap of faith into figuring out what's next. I don't know exactly what that is, but I keep trying to remind people I'm Sarah Boes. So you didn't know you were doing that, but I really appreciate that. But by trade, I am a nurse. I'm actually a nurse practitioner. And during COVID, I had this really beautiful opportunity to create my own business that was actually completely centered around mental health. Build up your confidence before you take your nurse practitioner exam, really reduce your anxiety and reduce your anxiety in the sense of build up your toolbox. Because I tell people all the time, if you graduate nurse practitioner school, you can pass this exam, but it is very much a high stakes, high pressure exam because it's a licensing exam. If you don't pass, you've spent all this money and all this time in school, and now you can't move forward. And then as a part of my own board prep process, I just felt really unseen and really unheard because I was having big raging anxiety. It did not help that I was preparing to take my exam during COVID. And so the world was just anxious and there was a lot festering around, but I just didn't feel like there were resources for me. And so when I passed my exam and it was way easier than I ever would have anticipated, I was I kind of made a mountain of a molehill sort of thing. And I want to help other people figure out this really isn't that bad. I mean, you've obviously got to prepare, but it's going to be okay. And because mental health had not really been talked about in that realm or in that way before in the nurse practitioner space, people were craving it. People were so excited. It was one of the coolest days of my life. The day I opened my business, I made $1,000 in a day, and the course was $15. And
Wow.
I was I don't know what just happened, but this was so cool. And what if I made $1,000 every day? It was just insanity to me, right? But as I created my business and it kind of grew, I know it's cliche to say, but literally beyond my wildest dreams, my mental health kept coming back to the forefront. And I feel like I really used the busyness of my business to outrun my mental health, which can work for a little while. But I was forced to confront it after the sale of my business because obviously a lot of entrepreneurs dream of selling their business. It's a very big climactic moment, I guess would be the way to put it. And so you dream of doing this thing. And I did it so quickly to do it before the age of 30. So I started my business when I was 25. I sold it when I was 27, riding the highest of highs. I did the thing. And then within a few weeks of selling at 36 weeks pregnant, we found out my daughter Meadow was going to have a set of 4 congenital heart defects. And she was going to have open heart surgery her first week of life. She's going to have at least 4 more in her lifetime. She's already had 2 to date. And I really just could not outrun my mental health anymore. It really came full force. And luckily, because of the acquisition, I had enough space and flexibility. So I needed the time space, but also the money flexibility to let that be a priority. And not to say my mental health hadn't been a priority in my life, but it never had been able to be that in that way. After we settled out Meadow's health, which by the way, she's doing wonderfully, I was okay, all these diagnoses I have, social anxiety and PTSD and generalized anxiety, none of them exactly fit. And so I'm gonna try one more time. Like, I've been in therapy since I was 12. I was like, "I'm gonna try one more time and see if we can get it right." And OCD was the right answer. So there I do a lot of education now, mental health awareness, OCD awareness. There's so many stigmas, there's so many stereotypes around what OCD actually is. And I can promise that I do not fit into whatever box that you guys are thinking about at home of what OCD is. But
No, that's wonderful. I appreciate you sharing the story and some of the backstory that led to it, because I think that as business owners, and especially one you had recently sold your company and acquisition, we don't realize how much of our mental health is really at the forefront. As business owners, we tend to think that it's business first, and that's where
always.
everything else falls to the wayside. So, what you're sharing, I could definitely relate to in so many ways, because as a mental health advocate myself, I learned that I had to battle so many things, and it was so heavy. So it's like what I learned in entrepreneurship is it's one of the greatest self discovery journeys you'll ever embark on.
Mm. Yes, that's perfect description. Oh my goodness.
You learn so much about yourself, the ins and outs, and you have to know yourself from every inch and corner of the inside. And you learn so much about it. But, as you're going through this journey, I jotted down a few things that I wanted to talk about is, when you mentioned you took this leap of faith, and really that's what confidence is knowing deep down that it will work out. So I'd love for you to unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, I actually was just telling someone this yesterday. I think the most beautiful thing that the business gave me was actually confidence in myself. Like, prior to starting the business, like, I made 40 grand a year as a nurse. We were barely like scraping by, like just making ends meet in like the purest sense of the phrase. And so I was always just living in this endless of like, how do I get to the next payday? What does that look like? How much overtime can I work? And there was not a lot of time to really like build any confidence or faith because it was survival mode. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. It was just pure survival all the time. Now that we have a little bit more flexibility in our lives as a result of the acquisition, I can truly leave my job behind and leave this former business behind, which is so scary, by the way, because it still has my name and my face on it, but I'm not going to be a part of a day to day anymore like I have been, and figure out what I want to do next and take some space to rest too. I think there's a lot of leaning into like I have been working so hard for the last 5 years since the moment that I created this business. Because even when like my daughter was in the ICU, like I would come out to my office and do course recordings and different things because like I still wanted to be in the business and I felt like that was important. I feel like that was silly now. Back then it felt very important to me because you get in that business mentality. And I think there's a layer too as a female founder, like you you're very careful with how you show your emotions. And so there's a lot of pieces that go into that. But taking the space and the capacity and the time to rest and not know what's coming and just lean into whatever that is. I'm very excited to do that. My OCD is a little wild about that. They're like, what do you my OCD is a third person to me. So I'll start there. But it's like, what do you mean you don't know what you're gonna do? And I'm like, well, I'm gonna work on my book and see what happens and like things will unfold how they're supposed to unfold. But like the leaning in is a little bit new, and it's actually something that OCD treatment has given me the grace to be able to do. Because my OCD wants certainty. My OCD wants everything figured out all the time. And so even if you had asked me like a year and a half ago, like, do you think you could just like enter into the unknown? I'd be like, no, no, absolutely not.
Kind of what 2020 taught us, didn't it?
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Sink or swim. And it was like,
Oh, wait, what?
we didn't even know that we signed up for this. But yeah, oh my goodness. It's like something that you express it in such a way, and how we were thrown into this and didn't know the uncertainty, the unknown, right? We were all in this sense of survival mode because we didn't even know what was happening. The first couple of weeks were like, okay, this is just a thing. And then it was like month one, month two, and so on. We're like, wait a minute. Now the whole world is feeling this darkness that has passed over us. It's like, how do we focus on our faith and our confidence? How do we focus on building that belief and knowing that certainty and a sense of control, right? Because that OCD, mental health, we want to be in control. It's just the reality of it. And now we're in a space where it's like we have none. So we have to walk in this darkness, not, on our own accord, but by faith and with confidence. And when you talked about your daughter being in the hospital and you would come home and just still get to work and do the grind and do the hustle and put out the content, create the recordings, create this. And I know that so many people might be like, oh my gosh, well, why? Should she be with her daughter in the hospital? Should she be here? And like a million questions. But the thing is that everybody copes and deals in different
Absolutely.
ways. And I think that there isn't a quote unquote normal way to process this. And I think that's so important when we talk about mental health is that there is no one size fits all. Everybody must go through their own season and journey at their own pace. And this is their own race. So I can empathize with that as well, because now obviously I did not have a daughter in the hospital, but it's about when things get so heavy and I've had some very personal things occur. My default setting is just go back to work.
It's
Busy yourself in your
easier.
work because it's something that you can control. You know the certainty and outcome, you know what you can produce, and you know it's in this time frame. So it's a way that gives us that sense of coping mechanism where the world feels out of control, but yet there's this glimmer of hope that we have control.
Yeah, I think a lot about an OCD treatment actually is certainty and control are always an illusion. Nothing will ever be 1000% certain. Nothing will ever be 1000% in your control. In those moments when I was living in that hospital and I had no control over anything, with the added layer of this feeling of responsibility because I am technically a nurse practitioner. So there is a layer of control that I even want to have in the hospital setting, but I'm not able to have. Anything that I could potentially control meant so much to me. And turn your brain off, you know exactly how to show up and what you're going to do and what's going to look like. And so even just having a little bit of reprieve let me show it better.
And so even when it's like you take that step back now and look at your life from where it was into where it is today in these few short years, so much has happened. And so you've had to equip yourself with this know-how and managing and figuring out how to process not only building a successful business that you've sold for to just recently, right?
Yeah, I sold it in the summer of 2022.
Yeah, okay. So just a few years ago, talk about what that looked like. Now that your pieces are starting, they're all in place now. Catch us up.
Today, I feel like so much of my focus, because of the experience that we lived through with my daughter, is actually about CHD advocacy, CHD being congenital heart disease. And so that is something I am hoping to lean into this year. Over the last year, I've joined the board of a couple of different CHD nonprofits. We went and lobbied on Capitol Hill. I was meeting with congressmen here in Kentucky. I felt like my life kind of pivoted again in a major way for the first time since the business for me to show up in a congressman's office. And like, I really like, I do not understand politics. I do not understand all the bureaucracy and all the different layers, but I'm like, I am here with a story and a passion. It was really fun to be able to show up kind of in that beginner energy and not have any of like the layers of bias. But outside of that, like I'm 30 and I created a business and that was so exciting and it lit me up so much. There was so much passion fueled in that. I don't think there's any way I'm done creating businesses either, but I also need a break. So I just want a little bit of break, a little bit of space. I don't know what a future business could look like. My husband's starting his own business right now. And I'm like, you kind of idealize it a little bit too, because you're like, oh, like we did this and it was so much fun and all this stuff. Now to watch him put all the beginning pieces together, I'm like, this was hard. And this is like so much harder now that we have a kid. Like there's this extra layer here. Like you can't work 100 hours a week and be guilt free about it anymore. So there's all this new duality and balance that we're trying to figure out even in our family scheme. And there is no perfect answer to that question, by the way. But I think like the biggest thing for me moving forward as I kind of figure myself out and figure out this season of life is just really lean into authenticity. That was what fueled the business actually, was me just showing up and be like, hey, I was hella anxious about taking this exam. And it's totally okay if you're also super anxious about taking this exam and having that level of transparency. So I've done the same thing with my journey with my daughter and anything that I do in the future, any endeavors, like authenticity will be the core of it.
Yes, I love that. And you mentioned about just having to find your footing with all these life changes. And I think that that's something that we can all relate to is these transitions in life, right? Sometimes we try to fit that new transition into these old programmed ways. But we
Mhm.
realized that with a new transition, we have to have new programming, new routines, new structure. And I love that you mentioned about a season. Things are never permanent. And if we could almost look at our year's calendar, and they're just seasons, they're just temporary moments of time that we have to work super hard, but then there's a season to rest. There's a season to ideate and think and dream big, and then there's a season to implement. And so when we can counterbalance these seasons of work plus life, then I feel like that's kind of the harmony or quote unquote balance that we're looking for.
Absolutely. I lean into seasons very heavily, and I think part of it is because I have a toddler, and so, like, I know I am in the thick of a season right now. Her needs and her demands are so much higher now than they will be later, and, like, I wanna be able to show up for that, like, that's the kind of parent I wanna be, like, nothing matters quite as much to me and than being a present parent. And so right now is not the season for me to create a new business. And right now is the season for more space and more rest. And it doesn't mean I have to do those things all the time, but I just like really, really, really crave the flexibility to have that choice. When I was building the business, like that was a season of hustle. I mean, I hate the word hustle, but it was a season of hustle, but it was never something I was going to be able to do permanently, anyways. So there was always another season coming after that, even if I couldn't articulate that at the time. And so when I decided that I was going to leave my former business behind, I literally like I sat down with my husband. I was like, I just need to enter into a new season, but very intentionally this time. Even if I don't have it all figured out, you can still be really intentional about how you do it. And so I think as my daughter gets older and she goes to school, because right now she's home full time. So I have to like, for example, to do this podcast, I have to leave my house because otherwise she'd be running around hanging off of me and it's not very conducive, right? But there will be a season where she also goes to school and I'll be like, okay, maybe I want to build again now. I think it's very important to state that I have no shame in owning that because a lot of people are like, oh, you're a mom now. Like you can't create, you can't be a business owner. I'm like, my priorities are shifted and I chose that, and I'm going to continue to choose that, and I can choose something different in the future, but that's what I want for myself right now.
100%. You've hit the nail on the head about shifting those priorities. Not everything that was such top priority is always going to maintain that priority. You've articulated that perfectly. And I think that as you look at building a space to rest and be present and be that present parent that you've already envisioned. So it's like you're already hitting different goals. They're not so much of like tangible goals that the world can see. Success, I always think, is just subjective to one's own
Mhm.
idea of what that is. And it's their own interpretation. Success from a business standpoint could be like, wow, she sold this big, beautiful, incredible
Mhm.
business. But then the personal success is I get to live this dream that I've always wanted to be a present parent. And I'm actually living that out loud here today. You might not see it, but it's happening and that's success for me. So everyone's definition of success is very personal. And I love how you shared that. And so when you talked about earlier about rest and giving that space to create and ideate and be present. I know that some things have sparked up in your life that we talked about briefly before hitting record. And I'd love for you to share a little bit about what came in that space in the season that you're in.
For me, the biggest thing that's coming in the space and from the rest is the ability to work on my book. I've had this long-standing dream to work on this book. I've always wanted to write a memoir. I did not think my life was ever going to be exciting enough to even get close to writing a memoir. A lot has happened in a very short window of time. I think it would be fun to share about. However, what I found in the last year as I worked to leave my former business behind was I thought, like, as I freed up more time from work, that the book would be easier to write, and it was not. Because even though I had freed up time, I had not really freed up capacity yet. And there's a lot of capacity that comes from genuine rest, and I was not genuinely resting. So now that I have left, and now that I have no meetings on my schedule except for what I choose, and I have a lot less responsibility. Now, granted, I still have responsibilities as a parent that take their own capacity, right? But even just like reframing my days and reframing my perspective around the book, because I had this idea in my head that like every day I'm gonna get up and write 1,000 words because I have time flexibility. but I don't always have capacity to do that every day. And like a great example is I haven't written anything this week and I was really down on myself. And then yesterday I went and wrote 4,000 words. And I was like, oh, okay. So like I've got to set myself up for success better. But because I have been resting and because I have this awareness and being able to evaluate my body and my routine and my life, I'm able to put all the pieces together to be able to do that instead of just like throwing the book out. But it has been an adventure because I thought the book would be easier because I love to write. But writing about some of the hardest parts of your life is really hard, and it takes a lot of strategic planning in a way.
Mhm. Oh, I can relate to that with my book. It's self-help memoir. And it was one of those things where it's like you're writing it, and how do you write it in a way that you're sharing some of the most vulnerable pieces of your life?
Yeah.
Because that's not something you got to do and you just whip it out in like the hour. It's
No.
like you said, it takes a lot of mental bandwidth, and having that rest increases that capacity. And then you could be so fully present and relive some of those moments, but you're able to now have that space and the freedom to free write that instead of having to just dump it out, and it doesn't really make sense, and you're not really getting to the heart of
Yeah.
what the tangible takeaways are. And that's what I found too for when I was writing the book, is like some of the hardest things that I had to write in that book, I left intentionally like a gap in the story. Because I was like, I have to come back when I have that
Mhm.
space to relive some of those dark moments or those heavy places or the things that I really want to tell with intricacy and detail. So giving your space to do that was very smart on your part as well. So I do encourage that. And so tell us more about the book and some of the takeaways and the tips and things that you're hoping your readers will implement into their life as well.
I think absolutely at the forefront of the book is just awareness of mental health. I mean, I went 18 years with the wrong diagnosis. That's a really long time to not feel seen because when you have the wrong diagnosis and you're not getting the specific treatment you need, you always feel it. Like there's always something in the back of your mind like, this doesn't feel exactly right. Like I don't feel exactly helped versus when I got my OCD diagnosis, which by the way, like my very first, like, OCD skill I did, I scored, like, 37 out of 40. That is, like, extreme OCD, by the way. I ended up doing an intensive outpatient program where I was doing, like, 5 to 6 hours of therapy a day for weeks on end, like, my OCD was really bad. But even though it was scary to get the diagnosis, it was also really relieving just because I knew it was something I could work on now. And I knew that it was very likely that the work I was going to do from that point forward was going to be helpful this time. And I wasn't going to keep trying to chase this magic thing I couldn't find, right? So mental health awareness is absolutely at the forefront, but there's all these like fun layers of entrepreneurship. I grew up in very rural Eastern Kentucky, one of the poorest regions of the entire United States. And so to kind of have this, I hate the phrase rags to riches, but like kind of have like this rags to riches story of like, my parents were teachers and to be able to go to college and become a nurse, and my parents were like, absolutely not. And then to circumvent them one day and teach other nurse practitioners, that was really fun for me. But there's a lot of beauty in the way that I crafted and created my business and was able to contribute to our nurse practitioner community, which I now also hope to do in the congenital heart disease community too. And as part of my advocacy work, we've done a lot of things, but part of it was donating a wing to our local children's hospital, which was like the coolest part of the acquisition for me. It was like this really fun full circle moment to like I never would have been able to like dream that I could do something like that. So, short story long, a lot of mental health, a lot of entrepreneurship, a lot of motherhood. I think that your life forever changes when you feel like you're going to lose your child and all the layers that come after that as well. So, it's a very intertwined story to say the least. But I hope what people will take away from it at the end is like I was just like small town girl from Eastern Kentucky. Like there's no reason that I should be able to like build a business, sell a business. I've never had one before. Donate a wing to a hospital. Like that sounds asinine. Like I couldn't even have dreamed that up. So I hope it's like a story of inspiration too. But still very much coming together because obviously I'm actively writing it.
Yes, and it's something, as you go through, it's like the story never ends.
Mm-mm.
It'll never end. And sometimes the hardest part of the story and the writing is putting that final period and saying, this is where it ends for this, because everything comes in this complete, I guess, book or telling of it. And I think that the longer you hold on to any story, it's just going to continue and continue and continue. Save that for the next book because there will always be another season, another chapter, another
Yeah.
experience. And so as you continue on this journey, it's like you're always going to have something more to unpack and teach. And as you're growing as an individual, that's what your goal is for your readers, your students, your clients, everybody that is in your ecosystem. And I think that's a beautiful gift that we get to give ourselves, but we get to give to others as well. And knowing that there's the sense of freedom to release and let go. And that's
Yeah.
where I think that you're leaning on as well. So I think that's beautiful. So obviously your book is coming out or is out.
It will be coming out very shortly.
Awesome. And so as we obviously there'll be all the information will be linked in the show notes below. So be sure to do that, to check it out. But with your book and what's the goal for that with how bringing this whole business together?
I think this book, I hope, kind of serves as a foundation for me for like how I move forward into this next season. Actually, like the business chapter is not closed by any means, but I think there's a lot of world of like teaching and mentorship, especially in business, especially in relation to female founders. I hear this statistic all the time, like only 2%, well, actually less than 2% now of female founders ever even make it to $1 million in revenue. That's not profit, that's revenue. And so I really kind of want to move forward into that energy and helping people, but I want to do this book first and then kind of work my way out from there.
Beautiful. And so I know that as we begin to wrap up today's episode, I wanted to give you a few minutes to just really bring in everything and is just anything that we haven't covered or talked about that you'd love to share with our listeners.
I think something that's really huge for me and something because we've tapped on it a lot too about OCD is absolutely just like take a breath with me and understand with me that it is more than hand washing. And there is this very specific media portrayal of like it's just someone that washes their hands 95 times a day. And there have been times in my life where I have been really compulsive about contamination. COVID really sparked that for a lot of people that had OCD that didn't know they had OCD. That being said, OCD at its core is this absolute desire for certainty in everything in your life. And so the entire premise of OCD is figuring out how to sit with uncertainty all the time, which, by the way, is super scary. And it means that you have to sit with some of your deepest, darkest fears head on, look them in the face, and be like, if it happens, I will figure it out. If it happens, I will cope. I think the best example I can give was when I was doing my intensive outpatient treatment. A lot of OCD compulsions were revolving around my daughter. There's a theme in OCD called hyper responsibility, where you feel just absolutely beyond responsible for some sort of outcome that you cannot control. And so for me, because my daughter had almost died after her second open heart surgery, I had all this responsibility of I'm the human that has to keep her alive because I'm the medical provider in this house. Like the scariest thing in the world to me is losing my daughter. But in my therapy, I felt like it was going to be like the worst, like luck, juju, whatever you want to call it to do this thing. But my therapist actually, we got online together and we made a tombstone for my daughter as if she had died. And I just had to sit there and not do any of my compulsions or any of like my knock on wood stuff, like all this special stuff that I do to try to ward off all the things. There's a lot of magical thinking and OCD as well. But I tell you this because it's so much more than hand washing. And not to discredit the people that have contamination fears and hand wash by any means.
I love how you put that in perspective and wow, what an exercise you had to do. That snapped you into the reality, right? Like
Yeah.
this is the present, the here and now. Like none of that beyond matters.
Nope.
And it's interesting how something just came to mind here. I follow this individual on Instagram and he had just reached 1 million followers. And he said, you know what? I didn't even realize that I hit it. I was having lunch with my daughter.
Hmm.
Didn't even know. came
Wow.
back to my phone, checked my messages, saw that I had hit a million. And it never occurred to me to be like, wow, what a milestone. Because in perspective, the milestone was him taking that time to have the freedom of flexibility to sit down with
Yeah.
and
That's so beautiful.
the way he said it at the end was just like, he goes, you know what? When life throws all these things at you, and if I were to lose my Instagram account and all those millions of followers, I wouldn't care. But if I lost the moment with my daughter, I would be absolutely devastated. And it's so, yes, we know that, but yet how much of us in our lives get so caught up in the business, in the content, in the numbers, in the followers, in doing all the things that we miss out on these present moments. And so I'm sure that you can really relate to that, especially with your journey and the birth of your daughter and so much of the ups and downs and the uncertainty that it does feel like your inner world is so out of sorts with the outer world and there's no sense of control. And that had to be one of the most painful experiences going through with OCD and having to write that tombstone. Wow.
It's like still gives me the heebie-jeebies. I like,
Um,
I,
I'm
I,
staring at that.
there's also this thing of like being recovered versus recovering from OCD. And I tell people I am permanently recovering. I'm never fully recovered. So like I had to sit here with myself as I made that statement and not do like my mental compulsions because some of OCD is invisible too. Like not do all my magical juju things. I'm like, nope, I just have to sit with my heebie-jeebies and that's part of my life. But that's awesome because that means that I'm healing and I'm doing the work and it's good.
Yeah. And I love that you mentioned recovering, not recovered, because
Never
it's always a
recovered.
work in progress. And
Mhm.
I think that I can relate to that. I always say that I'm a recovering perfectionist. I'm never recovered because
Same.
that awareness is that choice every day that I have to fight that battle. And the minute that I opt out is when I will lose. And then I can default back to those program settings that we're
Yeah.
always hardwired with. No matter what or how we can reprogram or reset our mind, there's just always a default in us. And that doesn't mean that it's inherently bad or wrong. It's just, it is who we are. And I think that that's a beautiful, beautiful way to live a life, to know that we're unique, but yet there's a suffering. And so everyone suffers in some capacity or another. But yeah, this conversation has just been so inspiring in all the ways, from the ups and downs. And your story has given me goosebumps and shivers just a few moments ago. Oh my goodness. But I'm just so grateful for this opportunity to just have this time to talk about, the mental health and the importance of rest and recovery. And especially in this entrepreneurial journey that we're all on, or most of us are on, is that it's not a cakewalk. And whether you're an entrepreneur or not, there's always something that is going on in the background. And that brings us into leading more with confidence, compassion, and empathy for others.
Yeah, compassion is actually one of my favorite OCD skills that I have. Just giving more compassion for myself, more compassion for others. And just like a gentle reminder too, like there's such a negative connotation around rest in today's culture and like no shame for resting. We all need rest to be able to do the next thing.
We tend to think the rest is laziness or that we just don't care, we're unmotivated. And as somebody who has hit burnout way too many times, rest is part of the equation for
Yeah,
success.
part of the process.
Yes, you have to give yourself that downtime. More importantly, because your mind needs it. You need that for your mental health. And your mental health is really what revs the engine to go. So I appreciate today's conversation. But before we head out, I'd love for you to share with our listeners how they can find you.
The easiest path right now is sarahmichellebose.com. I have a pretty active Instagram. So if you want to follow me, it's literally my name. It's Sarah Michelle Bose as well on Instagram. Those are the easiest finds. But I love to have like human to human to connection with people. And I'm not just saying that like when I started my business, I talked to my first 5,000 customers through Facebook Messenger. Like I really love to talk to people. And so don't hesitate to reach out.
Awesome. So, of course, all of that will be in the show notes below. So be sure to give Sarah a follow. And if this episode resonates, let her know. So awesome. Thank you, Sarah, for being our guest. And we look forward to continuing and following along with you on your journey.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time so
Thank you. If this conversation stirred something in you and you're in a season of rediscovery or you're walking through your own becoming journey, check out I Am Becoming. It's a 6-week devotional and journal experience that's helped so many women reconnect with their identity and faith. So be sure to click the link in the show notes below. Hey there. Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode of the Confident Woman Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode as much as I did, please be sure to like, subscribe, and leave us a review. Thanks again for listening.